In this video, I'm going to react to why the world sometimes bashes Americans. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. This is the place where I react to music, media, sports, anime, anything related to popular culture. I'll watch it with an open mind and give you my 100% honest reaction to it. And if you could please hit that like button early, I'd really appreciate it. Now this should be genuinely interesting because it's from Lost in the Pond, Lawrence's channel. Really love it. It's just a great channel because, you know, it's got an English guy born and raised here, moved to America, so he gets to kind of like give his sort of first-hand perspectives. And he's tackling quite an interesting topic because sometimes, you know, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but some people have, you know, quite negative opinions of Americans. They like to generalize all of them as being a certain type of way, which, you know, is quite ignorant really, because to generalize a whole country, especially a country as, you know, as diverse and as huge, with so many different states with their own cultures, trying to sort of tar them all with the same brush is just, it's really silly. And Lawrence is basically going to kind of, to be honest, I actually don't even know what he's going to do in this video. Maybe he's just going to kind of explain why certain stereotypes of Americans exist. But either way, it's going to be really interesting. So let's go. There's going to be me reacting to why the world sometimes bashes Americans. Let's do it.
Just running, pretending. I'm sitting down while running. You know, it's not a valid form of exercise. Oh, hello.
He reminded me of Tom Cruise in all of his movies. Like, is the quality of this the highest? So.
Guess what I've been doing this week? I've been reading Twitter. It's a big mistake. Nobody should ever do that. But while I was reading Twitter, came across this tweet. Take a look at that.
An American friend and her husband had reservations at New Club Brighton, an American diner in Brighton. They were greeted with a sign that said, "Love American hops, but hate Americans." So they walked out. I would have too. We'll definitely take it off my list of diners to visit. Yeah, that's, you know, really dumb from that establishment. I mean, come on, you're going to turn off a lot of customers.
Right, and it got me thinking, you know, why do we bash Americans? And I don't mean we as in me and everyone else. And I don't just mean this, you know, politically. There seems to be a tendency toward bashing Americans in general. Now, before I do continue, I should reiterate that, of course, this isn't all British people bashing all Americans all the time, but there is still, nonetheless, this tendency that happens there. And you wouldn't expect a restaurant to write this about other nations or other nationals from around the world, but somehow it's fair game with Americans. And that is something that I've never understood. Of course, now I understand it even less, having lived in America for 11 years and married to an American who would not take kindly to me saying such a thing. So, you know, I just wanted to give some thought as to why we think it is fair game. In order to do so, we have to look historically at the relationship, the now apparently special relation.
Do you know what it could be? It could be just because obviously America has the status it does, you know, wealthiest country in the world. So a lot of people try and take maybe cheap shots, maybe because they feel threatened or jealous perhaps.
Between Britain and America. And so, you know, I think anti-American sentiment, if you want to call it that, among my British compatriots has existed for centuries. I mean, you could go back to the early colonization of what is now the United States. Even after that, take, for example, Samuel Johnson, the inventor of the original English dictionary in Britain. He was the sort of the precursor, I suppose, to Noah Webster in that sense. And, you know, he had quite a strong anti-American sentiment to him. He's the very man, in fact, that said, I am willing to love all mankind except an American. And that's not all he said. I mean, that's not where it stopped. He also said, by his own choice, this was of somebody who would move to the continent of North America, or just the United States in general. By his own choice, he has left a country where he had a vote and little property for another where he has great property but no vote. And in many ways, that's sort of in line with King George III's idea that as a political entity, America had no hope, that it would go nowhere. And of course, then it did. It became independent from the British. You could almost argue that that may have led to resentment, at least at that very time. I think if you were to talk to British people today, they may not even cite 1776.
Yeah, today it just doesn't exist in any circles that I'm part of. I mean, it makes no sense. Like,
as a reason for their resentment against Americans, should they have that resentment. And that's quite an interesting point, right? So I'm not sure that all prejudice toward Americans today is even tied to history. In fact, to its detriment, it often ignores it. In the case of language, actually, quite often, as I've pointed out before, we ignore sort of the historical patterns behind language and how Americanisms came about from Britishisms. You know, I've talked before about the word soccer having been coined actually in England, if you want to talk about lexicon. The same is true of certain spellings of words. Let's look at aluminum. We say and write aluminium back in the UK, and you say aluminum here. Well, aluminum was previously in use in the UK and was debated back and forth between members of the science circle there as to which one we should go with. And then similarly,
why was aluminum ever put forward as a pronunciation for aluminium? Like, was it because it's maybe easier to write? Because if you've already named a metal aluminium, why then have an alternative name for that metal? I'd love to know what was the reasoning behind it.
When we're talking about pronunciation, a lot of Americans have a tendency to drop the H on herb, whereas the British tend to keep it, but that was not always the case. We started out by dropping the H on herb because of the French tendency to do so, just as we do with the words honour and hour and things of that ilk. But we stopped doing that just because it was becoming quite a class issue. If you were doing that in the UK, you were seen as unintelligent at one point. That memo never got spread over here in the United States, so they dropped it, and we ignore that fact when we criticize Americans from a linguistic point of view. And that's not where it ends. You could talk about sort of American stereotypes that have emerged. Americans are loud. We've talked about this before, but of course that is quite specific to certain things. And, you know, just as it would be in reverse if we were to sort of stereotype my fellow countrymen for having...
Like, I've heard that Americans find British people more reserved. Like, is that something that you would like the viewers of this video, would you say that too? Like, it's a good question. I do think that British people probably tend to are a bit more, they maybe hold themselves back a bit, perhaps a bit more reserved. But then again, you know, I've met Americans that also are, you know, fairly reserved individuals. So it's kind of hard, but maybe as a whole, British people are a bit more reserved. I don't know. Let me know what you think.
Bad teeth because of the depiction in Austin Powers, for example. Not necessarily true of all British people. We do guide a lot of our things based on stereotypes. I'm talking now, of course, about the present day, having talked about the 18th century. But in between that, the relationship between the United States, or at least the political relationship between the United States and Great Britain, has changed, and specifically in and around World War II, when we sort of forged the aforementioned special relationship. You could still find quotes such as this, which was actually not by Winston.
Americans will always do the right thing after exhausting... He didn't really say that. No way.
Churchill. It's often said that Winston Churchill said it. He did not. There's no evidence for it. But the quote came out of somewhere. Somebody invented it. And so I think it's kind of a never-ending thing. But the big question is, why? Why do we bash Americans? We don't do this to people from other predominantly English-speaking countries like Australia or Canada. So we have to look at a couple of things. Firstly, America is a big dog in the world. It's the biggest dog, perhaps, in the world. Has been since World War II. We're very familiar with that idea. So in the present day, if we're ignoring history, as some are wont to do, are we simply looking at how America is a big dog and applying envy to that? Let's not forget, Britain also thinks of itself as sort of the greatest country in the world. It just uses different terminology. You know, it's very proud of what it's achieved, and rightfully so. I mean, we gave a lot to the world of music. We've given a lot to the world of technology, to the world of sport, etc., etc. And so when another country comes along and does all these things sort of bigger and grander and is itself extremely proud of its efforts, perhaps we look at that with a tinge of envy. I'd be lying if I said we didn't. And at the same time, there is respect. I think there is respect back in England for the United States. It's a weird sort of back and forth, a Jekyll and Hyde personality that we have toward America. But some other things, through television and through media, we are granted, or rather given, an idea of what Americans are like. So we'll more than occasionally see news stories like this one. So when we see news reports,
Florida man calls 911 over missing beer so many Oh, no way. Carlos Bueno Mir first claims that his wife threw out his brew. Then he claims a strange woman stole a few. Either way, cops told him the situation wasn't as dire as he thought. That's quite a funny story.
Reports like this, which I should say are very isolated but nonetheless very eye-catching and loud news reports, we have this tendency to assume, I think, through the frequency of it, that all Americans are like this, when in fact, through my own experience, I found it to be not the case at all. I think most Americans that I interact with, while just like everyone else in the world may have their own neuroses that are unique to themselves and things of that nature, mostly aren't committing very bizarre crimes in Florida. I think that, partly when we want to talk about British attitudes toward America, you have to remember that Britain just likes to moan. I mean, we do. We're a nation of moaners. I'm not a nation, but I am a moaner by nature because of, I think, my upbringing. But I tend to reserve that for things like the weather or the food that I'm about to eat tonight. It's not usually about a group of people from a nation, because let's remember that America is such a diverse nation that how could you really pigeonhole everything?
That's exactly what I mentioned at the start of the video. I mean, it's like 50 states, 50 different cultures. It's just, how can you say, all Americans are like this or that, when there's just so many different types of American? It's just a really random thing to say.
Everybody into the same category. It can't be done. To that extent, it is impossible, I think, to bash Americans. You could bash a particular American for something terrible that he or she did, but to do it to a whole nation of people is very short-sighted in my view. But don't feel too bad about that, America, because we don't just reserve it for you. We do something very similar to the French, and for similar reasons as well, both linguistically based and also imperially based, historically speaking. So, when I see a tweet like that I showed here at the beginning of the video, I almost wish I could encapsulate all of these thoughts into one video and reply to that tweet with said video. And now I can. I win. And so that is why we, /they/the British, don't slash the British. It's not the Revolutionary War. That's why the British bash Americans. Thanks for watching.
Great vid.
Thank you for...
Great vid. I mean, it pretty much confirms my suspicions. It's just, in my opinion, a jealousy thing. You see another country prospering financially, culturally, in terms of innovation, technology, power. If you feel threatened by it, it's a basic human emotion. We're a competitive species. So yeah, I just think it's from a place of envy, but I think it's a very small minority of people that hold these feelings towards Americans. I think, well, I know that, all of my friends, we have positive thoughts towards America. So yeah, it's definitely not something to be concerned about at all. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and keep throwing the recommendations my way. I know I say it all the time, but they genuinely help me out, because if I know you enjoyed watching something, I'll definitely enjoy reacting to it. So like, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, keep throwing the recommendations, and I'll catch you in the next one.